geology students. This lab is going to be about fossils, and we're going to start for the rest of the semester. We're going to be doing fossils labs, and what I want to do is get you ready for these fossil labs. We're going to mostly focus on invertebrates. These are animals that do not have a backbone. We are vertebrates. So are reptiles and birds and amphibians and fish. They're vertebrates. But there are many animals that do not have a backbone or spinal column. And those are called invertebrates. Things like clams and oysters and corals and worms and starfish and protozoa. These are all types of invertebrates. You might remember from last week that we talked about domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Well, all of these invertebrate animals belong to kingdom Animalia. They are animals, and they belong to domain Eukarya. And these are the phylum that we need to get comfortable with, and we're going to look at them over and over and over again for the rest of the semester. And here's a list of the phylum that you need to know and you need to be able to identify in the fossils labs. Here they are, one at a time. Phylum Protozoa, Phylum Porifera, Phylum Archaeocyte, Phylum Synidria. Remember, this is all Latin. Phylum Bryozoa, Phylum Brachiopoda, Phylum Mollusca, Phylum Annelida, Phylum Arthropoda, Phylum Echinodermata, Phylum Hemichordata. We need to be able to identify each of these phylum. And also, we need to know the classes. So the phylums are divided into smaller groupings called classes in the Linnaean classification scheme for the following phylum. Phylum Mollusca. We need to know also what type of mollusks are we looking at. So let me first give you the mollusca is Latin, mollusks are in English, and we need to know these three classes in Phylum Mollusca: class Gastropoda, class Bivalvia, and class Cephalopoda. We also need to know the classes for the Phylum Arthropoda, which is class Trilobite, class Crustacea, and class Insecta. And we need to know the classes for the echinoderms, Phylum Echinodermata, which are class Blastoidea, class Crinoidia, class Echinoidea, and class Asteroidea. For all of these other phylums, you don't need to know the classes for this class. Now, if you're going to go and be a geologist, you will need to know the classes for all of these phylum. But for this class, you only need to know the classes for Phylum Mollusca, Arthropoda, and Echinodermata. Okay, let's take a look at these one at a time. Phylum Protozoa are single-celled organisms. And let me show you what they look like. Let's see. So we could look at these guys, and these are very tiny. These are very small, like a 16th of an inch or a 32nd of an inch thick, and they look like this. And they have these little bubble-like forms in them. These float in the water. These are examples of Phylum Protozoa. When you're looking at Protozoa, you're looking at very tiny little fossils. And that's the first phylum, Phylum Protozoa. In order to go forward, though, and go through all these other phylum, I mentioned that these guys, Phylum Protozoa, float in the water. We need to go a step further and look at this picture here. This picture here shows you the modes of life, MODES, the modes of life for marine animals, invertebrates, or vertebrates for that matter. We'll be talking about vertebrates later on. So here's the words you need to get comfortable with, ladies and gentlemen, is you need to get comfortable with these words. So when you're looking at any animal, think of its mode of life. You need to figure that out for each fossil. They can either be planktonic, they could be nectonic, or they could be benthic. Now what does that, okay, write those down. Make sure you know these are the three modes of life for all animals living in the ocean. Okay, creatures that float in the water are planktonic. Their mode of life is they are planktonic. Creatures that swim in the ocean are nectonic. Nectonic. Nektonic. And creatures that live on the sea floor or burrow into the sea floor are benthic. Benthic. So once again, once you pick up a fossil, figure out was that animal planktonic? Did it float in the ocean? Could it swim in the ocean? If it could swim, it's nectonic. Or did it live on the sea floor or in the sea floor? First hint I'll give you is most of the creatures you're going to look at are benthic. But you will have some nectonic ones, and you'll have a few planktonic ones to look at. Okay, let's go back to our list again. The first type of fossil we took a look at is Phylum Protozoa, and these are organisms that float in the ocean. So these are they A, benthic, B, planktonic, or C, nectonic? They are planktonic. Phylum Protozoa are planktonic. Okay. Next one we're going to look at is Phylum Porifera. Phylum Porifera, in English, we call these sponges. Not the sponges you buy at Kroger's, which are these artificial sponges, but natural sponges. These are living things that live in the ocean. See if I can get some pictures of what these look like for you. Okay. Natural sponges, you've seen these. They look like this. You can find these at the most boring place on the planet called Bed Bath & Beyond. And these sponges here's some pictures of different sponge fossils. Let me see if I can. Here's one. Here's a real common one that you're going to see. Notice all the little holes it has in it. These holes are for filtering water. They filter the water, and then they eat any matter, usually decay animals and plants that have died, and the debris, and they will take those in. Here's another sponge here, a sponge fossil. Here's another sponge fossil. Notice all the little holes that it has in it. Sometimes they're circular in shape like that. We don't want to get these confused with corals, which we're going to look at later on. Here's a fossilized sponge. And When you're looking at the fossils in lab, look at the pictures in your lab manual. It's even better than looking on the internet. It's got almost every single fossil there in your lab manual. Look for pictures of the fossil you're looking at until you find one that matches what you're looking for. Phylum Peripheral. Okay. Next one is Phylum Archaeocyte. We're not going to talk about this right now because we don't have any of these at the lab here at Rome State. But later on, when we get to a later chapter, we'll talk about these. They were a very important index fossil for the Cambrian period of the Paleozoic era. So far we've looked at sponges. Sponges live on the ocean bottom. Are they benthic, planktonic, or nectonic then? Okay, I'll give you 10 seconds to think about it. If they live on the bottom, are they benthic, planktonic, or nectonic? They are benthic, right? They are benthic. Look for all the little holes they have in them. And then see if you can find, if you have a fossil and you think it might be a sponge fossil, see if you can find a picture of it in your lab manual or online. But it's easier in the lab manual, believe me. And if you find a sponge fossil, it belongs to Phylum Peripheral. You don't need to know the class. Next, we're going to look at Phylum Synidria. Some people pronounce it Nidria. Nidria in English means corals. In Latin is Nidria. So what do coral fossils look like? Well, let's take a look. Coral fossils, and this is one of the favorite things I like to do, is to look at fossils. Here's some typical coral fossils, pictures of them. You're going to get this. This is called a horn coral. It looks like the symbol for the state of California, a cornucopia, where you see all the fruits come out of it. But it comes to a point like this, and it has these it radiates outward, and then there's a hole here. And the animal, called a polyp, Polyp, lives inside of here. These also filter the water. And these corals here, one might be male and another one might be female over here. And they reproduce as animals do through sexual reproduction. It's a type of external fertilization. The female will release eggs into the water, the male will release the sperm, and when they meet, they make a new polyp, and that makes a new coral. These corals live separately, the male here or the female here, so these are called solitary corals. But some are colonial corals like this. And here you can see it's got lots of holes, but always it has, notice it's different than the peripheral. Notice how it always has these radiating lines from a central hole. And these are colonial corals, so there might be a male living in this chamber, a female in this one, a male in this one, a female in this one. And so instead of living alone like these live in one big colony. So these are called colonial corals. So how do they reproduce? Again, the male might be here, the female is here, female releases her eggs, the male releases his sperm, and then it forms a new polyp, and then it'll add on another chamber to this colony. It's not like Seinfeld, where here's Seinfeld, here's Elaine, and Seinfeld has to flirt with Elaine, and hopefully Elaine will come over to his apartment, and they'll have some wine, and then he'll have to make some moves on her, and if everything works out, there's Seinfeld Jr. It doesn't work like that. There's no sexual attraction here. The female releases her eggs, and the male automatically releases his sperm because he can sense the change in the chemistry of the water. He doesn't think, obviously, and that produces a new polyp. So these are corals, and look for this radiating structure like this. There's always that radiating outward structure. These are corals, and they belong to what phylum? Phylum Synidria. Phylum Synidria. Phylum Synidria, corals. They live on the ocean bottom. There's obviously no way that this creature could swim, right? And it's too heavy to float. So is it benthic, planktonic, or nectonic? Corals are benthic. They are benthic. Here's another one of these corals. Notice the radiating structure here. This is a colonial coral. Okay, the next phylum we're going to look at is Phylum Bryozoa. Phylum Bryozoa, also benthic, very common in Paleozoic rocks. Let's take a look at Phylum Brachiopoda. A friend of mine, Wesley Hayes, and I have found lots of these Bryozoa. I'll show you. Let's see a picture of it somewhere. Yeah, see, there's me and Wes and my friend Randall, and here's Bryozoa. We see all these Bryozoa in here. They kind of look. Let's take a look at the Bryozoa fossils. Here's the kind that Wes and I found. Here's a penny that gives you some scale to it. They kind of look like little twigs to me. They lived on the ocean bottom. Here's some different Bryozoa. Notice the penny. So they're not more than 2 or 3 inches long usually. They're usually less than an inch long, unless they grew to an old age, which is very rare. Some of them look like Rice Krispies like this. Others look like twigs. But they are animals that lived, and they formed reefs, like the coral reefs of today, only they did so during the Paleozoic. And here's another type of Bryozoa that's real common. It's called Archimedes, and kind of looks like a corkscrew. If you think a fossil is a Bryozoa, go through your lab manual and see if you can find a picture that matches the pictures I'm going to give you in lab. And when the quiz comes along, I'm going to give you actual fossils to identify. But first we're going to work with photographs. Here's some common pictures, common Bryozoa that you're going to see. You need to be able to identify these. They look like little twigs or corkscrews or Rice Krispies like this. They're usually less than an inch long. Phylum Bryozoa. Next phylum we want to look at is Phylum Brachiopoda. And these, in English, we call these Brachiopods. And we found a lot of these Brachiopod fossils. Let me show you. Here's my good friend Wes. He might be your medical doctor. He's a physician too. But let's see if I can find some of the pictures that. Here's some different fossils that we found here. Oh well. I'll look for it later. Let me just show you some pictures here. Here's some different Brachiopod fossils. They've got 2 shells. This is a common one in Tennessee. This is the state fossil of Tennessee. It's a Brachiopod. They lived on the ocean bottom. So are they benthic, planktonic, or nectonic? They are benthic creatures. They have 2 shells on a hinge. They are not clams, oysters, or mussels, or scallops. Those are a different type of fossil. Those are called bivalve fossils. These also have 2 shells, but the difference is, notice where the two shells meet, there's a little beak on it. This is called a beak. And that one shell is bigger than the other. The two shells are not of the same size. These are real easy to confuse with your bivalve fossils. Let's take a look at some Brachiopod fossils here. Notice the beak here. They got a little beak on them. And then one shell is a different shape than the other. They opened and closed on the hinge of the shell. And we found a lot of these, Wes and I, around Oliver Springs. Wes is a real interesting guy. He's a medical doctor, but he spends a lot of his time looking for fossils, so we became friends. Randall's retired, a statistics professor from UT, and then he joins us, and my girlfriend likes to do it too. And here you can see some beautiful Brachiopod fossils. They've got two shells and a beak. One shell is larger than the other. I love the shapes of some of these. They're quite beautiful. Very beautiful. Look at the hinge, and then you'll know if it's a bivalve or is it a brachiopod. Okay. These are Phylum Brachiopoda. Phylum Brachiopoda. You don't need to know the class. You just need to know, you need to be able to identify the brachiopods. Next, we're going to talk about Phylum Mollusca, also called the mollusks. Mollusks. And the ones that you need to know are class Gastropoda, class Bivalvia, and class Cephalopoda. Anyway, let me show you one at a time. Phylum Mollusca, class Gastropoda. Gastropoda in English means snails. Snails. Let's take a look at Gastropod fossils. As I said before, they are snails. And here's some different kinds of snail shells or snail fossils. Notice there's always an opening where the animal comes out with its you know what a snail's head looks like, right? It's got the two protruding antennae, and it comes out of this little shell. Notice that the shells come to a point. Each of these spirals is called a whorl, W-H-O-R-L, and it comes to a point. These are snails. Phylum Mollusca, class. If you find any snails, it belongs to what phylum? Phylum Mollusca. What class? Class Gastropoda. Are they benthic, planktonic, or nectonic? They are benthic. Notice that most of the creatures we've looked at are benthic. Now we're going to look at class Bivalvia. Phylum Mollusca, class Bivalvia. Bivalvia in English is bivalves. Bi means two, valve means shells. These are easily confused with the brachiopods, so you got to look at these real careful. And the bivalves include oysters, clams, mussels, and scallops. They have two shells, but the difference is that the two shells are equal in size. They're equal in size. On the hinge, they're equal in shape. Sometimes, like this is obvious as scallop shell. And you never find those on brachiopods. Another thing that's different about the bivalve fossils is that they're usually larger. They're usually longer than an inch or even 2 or 3 inches. But you got some small bivalves too, so you got to be careful. Here's a bivalve fossil. Notice that the two shells are the same size. Don't confuse these with the Brachiopod fossils. These are Phylum Mollusca class Bivalvia, and if you're not sure, go look in your, there's a bivalve fossil. Look in your lab manual, see if you can match up the pictures. Phylum Mollusca class Bivalvia. Next, we're going to talk about class Cephalopoda. In English, we call them the Cephalopods. Cephalopods are things like Cephalopods are things like squid and octopus, or the nautilus. Let's take a look at the nautilus. It's related to the squid and octopus. It lives in the Southwest Pacific. It has the same features that an octopus or a squid has. It has tentacles, an eye that is the most advanced for any invertebrate, best eyesight of any invertebrate. They swim in the water. Even with its shell, it can swim in the water. Are cephalopods benthic, planktonic, or nectonic? They are nectonic. Most of your predators are nectonic, and they can swim, including the nautilus. Now let's take a look at some cephalopods fossils. Okay, my friend Wes has found some of these. Some of these look like this. And the head would come out here with the tentacles. A lot of them look like this. That's not a snail shell. It doesn't come to a point. It stays in a single plane. And the animal's head would come out here through there. Each of these little lines here is a septa. It's a wall inside of the shell. And there'll be a hole that goes through this whole thing called the siphuncle. And the animal lives in here. And it could swim. Beautiful cephalopod fossils. They whirl, but they come to they don't come to a point like they do in snails, do they? Let's see. Here's another cephalopod fossil. And each of these lines is called a septa. And they're always segmented like that. These are all cephalopod fossils. There's beautiful pictures of these in your textbook that it's going to show you 99% of the fossils you're going to look at in lab, you're going to be able to find out of your lab manual. But I wanted to show you some pictures so you know what these look like. Cephalopod fossils. Phylum Annelida. Annelida in English means worms. We don't have that many worms in the rock record because they're rare. They don't have hard body parts, so we're going to not talk about those right now. Now we're going to talk about Phylum Arthropoda, and the ones that are most common and that we're going to look at the most in lab are class Phylum Arthropoda class Trilobota. Class Trilobota. In English, we call them Trilobites. They're only found in the Paleozoic rocks, never in Mesozoic or Cenozoic rocks. Let's take a look at Trilobite fossils. I love finding these. And if you like hunting for fossils, you love finding these things. They look like this. They lived on the ocean bottom, so they are benthic. They have three parts to their body. This part is the head. You can see the eyes right here. And their eyes are on top so they can see above and look for predators above in the water. We call that the head the cephalon. The cephalon. Then it's got the middle part called the thorax. And the end part called the pygidium. The pygidium. You can always take a trilobite and divide it in half. One part of its body is a mirror image of the other. These are the trilobites. Phylum Arthropoda, class Trilobota. Some of them got spines on them for defense, to protect themselves. Some of these trilobites, you ever see those roly-poly bugs? They can, in your yard, under a log, how they can roll themselves into a ball. Those are arthropods too, only those belong to the class Insecta, insects. Insects and trilobites both belong to Phylum Arthropoda, but the trilobites, when in danger, can sometimes roll themselves into a ball. So sometimes you find these trilobites rolled into a ball like this. The hard part is when you just find a piece of a trilobite like this. You don't have its head or thorax. You just have its pygidium. You still have to be able to identify it. But these are the trilobites. Some of them are quite unusual. This one has a lot of spikes for defense. Okay. Next, we're going to look at Phylum Echinodermata. In English, we call them echinoderms. And we need to know about class Blastoidea, class Crinoidea, class Echinoidea, and class Asteroidea. So let's take a look at echinoderm fossils. All kinds of creatures are echinoderms, including these that you've seen if you've ever been to the beach. They're called sand dollars. Notice that the sand dollar has 5 shapes on the back of its shell. Echinoderms always have things in 5s. That's how you can identify them. Starfish are class Asteroidea. Any starfish you find, how many arms does a starfish have? 5. Or a brittle star, how many arms does it have? 5. So notice everything comes in 5s for Phylum Echinodermata. Sea urchins are also Phylum Echinodermata. See, take a look at sea urchins. See, when you type in Google, you don't always get the correct thing. These are not sea urchins. These are sand dollars. But there's a sea urchin. If you look careful, you can see it's got 5 stripes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is its mouth. And there's another hole down here that's its anus. They lived on the bottom of the ocean, so they are benthic. Another creature is called a crinoid, and let's take a look at a crinoid fossil. Okay, the crinoid here's a complete crinoid fossil. It's very rare you're going to find one of these, but it has 5, 10, or 15 arms. These are its arms. It looks like a flower, doesn't it? But it's an animal. And it uses its arms to grab little fish or shrimp, and then it swallows it whole. And this is its neck. So it's got arms, and here's its head called the calyx. And its head is called a stem, S-T-E-M. And there's 5 legs on the bottom called the holdfast that it uses to hold onto the bottom of the sea floor. This is what the complete crinoid looks like. And the head is called a calyx. Unfortunately, we don't find heads that often, calyxes that often. But when we do, we get excited. Here's one with the arms broken off on it. This is a crinoid. And then the arms would come out here, and the stem would connect to there. So you got pieces of the head. Here's a piece of the calyx, which we call the head. But usually what we find, the most common thing we find for crinoids is a stem. which is a piece of its neck. And they look like this. You buy them on eBay, I guess. So here you can see the little hole here, and the animal lived down there. These are called crinoids. If you counted these little lines here, see those little lines radiating out from the center, it'd be some multiple of 5. These are crinoid stems. They look like this. Their necks. So the heads are missing. They've been beheaded. So Isis was living... No, I'm sorry. It's not funny. So anyway. Oh, here beautiful. Look at this calyx with the head and the stem and everything. I'm looking for those all the time. But these are crinoid stems. And what phylum do crinoids belong to? Phylum what? Echinodermata. Once again, starfish belong to phylum Echinodermata. And starfish belong to phylum Echinodermata and class Asteroidea. And sea urchins and sand dollars belong to phylum Echinodermata and class Echinoidea. As far as phylum Hemichordata goes, we only need to know about class Graptolithina. Class Graptolithina. In English, we call them graptolites. So let's take a look at graptolite fossils. Graptolite fossils are usually found in really dark shales, but not always. And they have these little razor blade like things. Look like that. These floated in the water. These creatures floated in the water. Graptolites floated in the water. Are they benthic, planktonic, or nectonic then? Look at these. These are common graptolites. Here's some other ones here. Little razor blade-like things. They're planktonic creatures. They floated in the water. What do these creatures look like in the real world? This is what the animals look like. We finally found some of them with a soft body tissue. Usually this part decays and you don't see it. And it floated in the water. These razor blade-like things were used to attack its prey or to protect itself. Any animal that tried to eat this would experience a lot of pain digesting these sharp spikes. And these can also be used to disable their prey. They floated in the water. Phylum Hemichordata, class Graptolithina. Now, in lab, you're going to need to identify the phylum of each fossil. And if any of the fossils belong to phylum Mollusca, you need to know the class. Or phylum Arthropoda, you need to know the class. Or phylum Echinodermata, then you need to know the class. But if it's not one of those phylums, you don't need to know the class. For each fossil, you need to figure out is it benthic, planktonic, or nectonic. We're going to get some practice on that in lab. I'll see you in the next video, where we start to talk about Hadean time in the next video.